Welcome to 100 Songs That Define Heavy Metal. I'm your host, Brian Slagel. I am the CEO of Metal Blade Records, home to bands like Killswitch Engage, Metallica, Slayer, Cannibal Corpse, Squar, Fate's Warning, and the band we're going to talk about today, Armored Saint. If you guys are looking for really cool merchandise, t-shirts, hoodies, the whole thing, from music, sports, entertainment, really almost anything, you guys have to go check out our friends at Old Glory. Go to oldglory.com and enter the code METAL1982. Again, that's METAL1982, and they're going to give you 15% off of your order. So go check them out. They have great stuff, lots of metal
check
gear.
Out our
go to
oldglory.com.
HeroCarePackages.com. Show your support with Hero Care Packages, premium military care packages curated to uplift our service members. If you want to help out and give our service members something fun, you can go to the site, HeroCarePackages.com. You can create your own package, customizable, to send to our service members. They will greatly appreciate it. We know that. We appreciate what they do, and they need stuff. So again, go to HeroCarePackages.com, enter the code METAL1982, and you'll get 10% off your order, and you can customize it, upload it, and send some really cool stuff to our amazing service members. And again, HeroCarePackages.com. We're going to talk about the great record, one of my favorite records of all time, Symbol of Salvation. We're going to have the man who was in the studio, played bass, and maybe some other things we'll find out about, Mr. Joey Vera, member of Armored Saint. Also going to talk to Mark Lewis, the great producer again, and talk about the production, which the great late Dave Jordan did. But to begin it, as always, going to have the great man from north of the border, who's written over 150 books about heavy metal, to give us some background and history on this song, Mr. Martin Popoff. Martin, take it away.
All right, nice one, Brian. Armored Saint, Reign of Fire. So yeah, Armored Saint situation. We've got the debut in 84, produced by Michael James Jackson, known for Kiss. We got Delirious Nomad, 85, Raising Fear, Armored Saint and Chris Minto on that one, Max Norman on Delirious Nomad. Now, these are all on Chrysalis, but now we arrive at the record that this is from. Symbol of Salvation, May 14th, 1991. First one for Metal Blade. We've got the live EP in there. In the interim, Saints Will Conquer. But now we've got Dave Jordan producing, right? Jane's Addiction, Alice in Chains. So yeah, this is the first track on the album. It's a big track. Spotify's got it at 1.5 million plays as I'm speaking here. But yeah, they've really stepped up their game. What I love about Armored Saint at this point is they are kind of sticking in that lane where they are like a classic American power metal band. They're kind of like a metal church still at this point. So they haven't changed, even though there is this transformation over to Dave Jordan and over to Metal Blade. So you get this song, you get this really cool intro on it. Gonzo's drums sound amazing. And later on, you get a modulation in it. I feel like this song is like a cross between pure classic heavy metal of the Dio Metal Church era mixed with a bit of Dokken. I'm hearing a little bit of heavy Dokken in this as well. Yeah, very cool album. I think they do a great job with this. It's the last album we get before the reunion. Sadly, we've lost Dave Pritchard at this point. Jeff Duncan is in there, but Dave still has a lot of writing on it. Pretty soon, John Bush. So John Bush is going to go on to Anthrax, of course. And in that situation, they hire on Dave Jordan to produce that album. The album sounds great. It's serious. Really good songwriting on this. A lot of catchy tracks on it. But yeah, this is a great anthem to kick things off. So great choice for one of these 100 songs. Armored Saint, Reign of Fire.
Thanks, Martin. He always has information that even I don't know about. This is a record I should know everything about. But he uncovers things that even make me surprised. So always appreciate him doing that. Once again, we welcome famed producer from his lovely studio somewhere in the state of Tennessee. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, no, I'm outside of Nashville. You make me sound so important. I appreciate you.
Mark Lewis, good to have you as always.
Well, thanks for having me.
People ask me, what's the favorite record you've ever done on Metal Blade? That's like impossible to answer because there's just way too many of them. If I'm forced at gunpoint to pick one, which I have not at gunpoint, but I've been forced before, I'll pick Symbol of Salvation by Armored Saint just because of a myriad of things. They're dear friends of mine. They started, on the label. They're the first band to get signed to a major label deal. After the third record on Chrysalis, they kind of broken up, and they had made all these amazing demos. And then sadly, Dave Pritchard, the great guitar player, passed away. And they kind of were just done with everything. They're done and nothing was happening. And I just had all these demos that they made and they were so great. I just kind of went to the band and begged them, like you can't let these songs just go away. Like just let's at least make a record just to get Dave's songs out there to do it. And, hopefully, get the band back doing it. And so they did. And we set about making this record, Symbol of Salvation. And the other thing that I really wanted to do was I felt it was really important because some of the early records, especially the first one, didn't sound as good as they should have been, was get a really good producer. And since I did a lot of work with Alice in Chains, I knew everybody in that camp really well, including Dave Jordan. And he was one of the guys that, I mentioned to Armored Saint. Because I wanted to also get somebody that was doing new stuff. And, David done Jane's Addiction and Alice in Chains. So, he's kind of in that new world, that new scene. It could give them a more updated sound. And thankfully he said yes. And he ended up making the record, which I still to this day love.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. It's a great sounding record. And I listened back to it and it's really tight and clear but still very Dave Jordan. Like he never made things too pretty. And I love that about him. Like if you listen to Sound of White Noise, it's a really burly sounding record compared to like other Anthrax records and things like that. But Dave like kind of dialed this one in and he knew the task with Armored Saint, I guess. But man, when you asked me, you said, hey, let's talk about this song. I was like, we can talk about vocals, and we've talked about John before, how great John Bush is, but the vocal mix on that record that's kind of a lost art, man. And I feel like the vocal can get so overlooked so much in mixes nowadays, or the band wants you to turn it down and whatever. And yeah, okay, John is this soaring great vocalist, who's obviously capable of a lot more than just singing in Armored Saint. But like that vocal mix is so clear and good, and you could hear it everywhere on every system. And I wish that was kind of more of the people were pushing for that, because I feel like people overthink vocals now and then turn them too low. And you have this great fucking track of John up the middle. Most of it's single, and it just sounds awesome.
Also, the other thing that I liked about Dave Jordan was, to me, Lane Staley always reminded me of John Bush. And he had a lot of John Bush influence in there, which if you go back, we've talked about it before when we were talking about Alice in Chains some episodes ago. But if you go back, you can see Lane's high school band covering an Armored Saint song. Go on YouTube and find it. So it's clearly a big influence. And obviously so I knew Dave could make John sound even better than he had before, because like I said, he had practice with Lane. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the vocals on that record, I think everything on that record is spectacular. I'm very biased, but certainly the vocals in John was just so amazing. And obviously when John went to go to Anthrax, he took Dave Jordan with him.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to ask you about that, but I do want to ask you about that. But it's funny that you bring that up, because I'm in the middle of tracking this Entheos record right now, and I was telling you about that. But I said, I need to hop on a call with Brian later, on this podcast. And Jenny goes, what's it about? And I told her about it, and she goes, I don't think I've ever heard that song before. I said, really? This is Cheney from Entheos, for everybody that wants to check her out. She's an incredible vocalist and has a real appreciation for things. And I showed it to her, and she goes, man, he kind of sounds like Lane Staley. And I said, yeah, I've said this to Brian before. His geographic location put him in metal bands, but I think had he been born in Seattle or somewhere else, he would have been brilliant anywhere he decided to be. And she immediately picked up on it. She's like, oh, wow, and I told her about how Dave had done Jane's Addiction and Anthrax, and then Alice in Chains, and it was. She thought it was a cool tidbit of history.
Nice, those youngins. You got to teach them.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how much you've covered it on the other parts of this episode, but how did John end up in Anthrax and Dave Jordan end up at the helm? Because it was after, right?
Yeah. So pretty much what happened. The record didn't do as well as we all wanted it to, because it was 1991. I firmly believe this record came out in 89. It would have been huge, but it came out when metal was getting crushed and pushed aside by all the grunge and everything else. And it did well, but it wasn't the breakthrough record that we all wanted. So I know that John was pretty disappointed. And at that point, Anthrax had kind of had enough of Joey. So they were moving on from Joey, and they always loved John Bush, and were always, even before I know Scott and Frankie and those guys, were like, wouldn't it be amazing if John Bush was in Anthrax? So they went about making it happen and kind of made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So he left and went to Anthrax. I'm not really sure because I wasn't really involved in any of that stuff. It was obviously not, on Atlantic or whatever major label it was. But I imagine that I know John and Dave had a really good relationship. So I imagine that was kind of like, hey, let's get Dave Jordan to do it because he did a great job on that Armored Saint record, and it all worked out. And I think that's still Anthrax's biggest selling album of all time. I know for a long time it was.
Sound of White Noise?
Yes.
You see, it's sacrilege, I guess, to say in the thrash circle, but it's my favorite Anthrax record.
I love it too. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and from a producer standpoint and somebody kind of song-minded, I mean, I feel like it would make sense for that to be your favorite Anthrax record, but I don't know. I mean, it came out when I was in my teens or, right about to be, and it was awesome, and I love it. I still listen to that record, and I listen to it quite a bit in my early days, and it's funny, and the whole thing about John, and how great he sounds, but you talk about Anthrax wanting him. I mean, there's stories that Hetfield wanted him to sing instead of him in Metallica. He's the band's singer, like he's the one that the peers look at. Everybody in bands goes, "Oh, John Bush is
100%. Those Metallica guys in the early days courted and begged John to be in the band because at that point, Hetfield was just the singer because they didn't really have anybody else, and he didn't really want to be the singer, and at that point wasn't a particularly good singer either. So they were all after John, but John's like, look, I grew up with these guys. At that point, Armored Saint was kind of happening as well. So it made sense for him not to do it. It is funny, though, and I'm pretty sure you can go look at this on YouTube, but when Metallica did their 30th anniversary shows, they did a whole week of shows in San Francisco. I think they played almost every song they ever put out, or many of them. Armored Saint opened one of the shows, and they brought John up to play one of the early songs, and James said, this is what Metallica would have sounded like if John was in the band, if we were successful in coercing him to be in our band. So it was kind of funny. I forget which song they did. It might have been Jump in the Fire. I can't remember, but it's up there on YouTube and it's really cool.
I have to go watch that.
Yeah, it's fun.
That's cool, man.
And Joey Vera, who I'm going to talk to in the latter segment of this podcast, he was really involved with the production. And I remember hearing and talking to Joey about it where, at some point Dave was pretty confident. And Joey's obviously he's a producer now. He produces most of the Armored Saint records and has been involved with a lot of stuff like that in the past. And this was the first time I think that Dave would let Joey do some recording. He's like, I'm going to go, do whatever. And I trust that you can make this stuff sound good just in the recording level of things. So I know Joey was like, wow, this is a legendary producer. And he's like, has enough confidence in me to let me do some recording on my own.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd love to pick Joey's brain about that.
Well, I'll do it for you.
Yeah. I will tune in.
But yeah, it was really great. And I remember it was an easy record to make. You know how records sometimes are, there's some that aren't easy and there's some that are easy. And this was a really easy record to make. And I was around the studio as much as I could be because it was an important record for me. And I remember the attitude of everybody was really good. And Dave, just like all producers, just a chill guy and, super cool and, whatever you needed. The mixing was really easy and it sounded exactly the way I had hoped Dave Jordan mixed and produced Armored Saint record sound.
Yeah, it's killer. It's a great record.
Yeah, I just like the fact that it stood the test of time because, like I said, we were all really disappointed that it wasn't, this big record when it came out. But again, came out at the worst time. But it's in, a bunch of these, Hall of Fames for these magazines, and they just did an entire tour where they played the whole record on its own, and that tour, sold out all the House of Blueses and whatever around the country. So it's still out there. A lot of people put it in their, all-time top 10. That's a little bit of vindication, I think, just the fact that to this day, people like it. And same thing, I listen to it quite a bit. I still love the production on it.
I do too. I mean, I love that whole era. It's something that I actively try to get back to, and a little bit of that precision of today with the aliveness of back then, There's so much to be learned from that era.
Yeah, and that era was so, 90, 91, 92. There's a lot of great metal music that came out at that time, but it was just, there was nowhere for it to go. You're not going to get played on the radio. You're not going to get played out on TV other than Headbangers Ball. And it's just the grunge stuff just pretty much as it should have been because at that point, hair metal had kind of ruined most of metal and even the good stuff. But there's a lot of great records. Like Fate's 20 Parallels came out around that time too, which is a fantastic record, which should have been a lot bigger. But as I say a lot of times, it's the career in the music business as a musician it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And if you can still be doing this as Armored Saint is at a really high level still, all these years later, they've kind of won the race, so to speak.
Yeah, man, it really happens like that. You stick it out and, you be a cockroach like me and these other bands, and you just, it's, man, I mean, and more than anything, you've been through it all. You've been through all the eras.
Crazy times. But yeah, I love to, always love to go back and revisit these records like this, just because, again, and I love the way a lot of new records sound too. And they're still producing and mixing and engineering is still an art that's extremely important to the music. But I do love going back to all this earlier stuff when it was harder to do. So I guess I have more of appreciation for that. I don't know.
It was harder, and it was so much more unique. Even the guys who quote unquote had a sound, they were really forced to do things differently on a lot of records because they didn't have templates and presets and consistent working environments. It's cool. I mean, I really try to get back to it. I mean, and sometimes I find guys that I grew up enjoying, and I'll punish the shit out of them. It's, hey man, how did you do this? Or hey, let's have a chat. And most of them are great and cool about it. You never stop learning. There's just something about the aliveness of things back then. I think the mastering has a little bit to do with it too, mastering levels. But yeah, I mean, we can say it, probably every time you have me on, I'm saying, we're missing a lot of the identity today. And then obviously there's an insane amount of power and precision that we have today that was never possible. And I love that. I love how shocking things can sound now, but also you got to be careful to not homogenize it,
Absolutely. Well, thank you once again for doing this. Much appreciation. And I'm sure we'll see you again soon.
Thanks for having me, dude.
It is my pleasure now to welcome a man who's played in many bands, among them Anthrax, Merciful Fate, Fate's Warning, and of course, this band we're going to talk about today, his main band, Armored Saint, the legendary Joey Vera. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm stoked. This is a killer podcast. I'm stoked.
Thank you. People always ask me, like, what's your favorite album you ever done on Metal Blade? It's like impossible to answer that question, right? Because I've been forced to do it lately. I've had to actually pick one, and I've picked Symbol of Salvation because of just the circumstances around it, which of course I've mentioned before, but you guys had kind of broken up. You had all these amazing demos, and then Dave Pritchard, the legendary original guitar player for Saint, got sick with leukemia and passed away. And you guys, I think, were pretty much just done with doing anything. And I remember begging you, please, these songs are so good. We have to at least do one album just to get these songs out there. And there's stuff that Dave worked on. And thankfully, you guys said yes.
Yeah. And, I've said this many times before, but we thanked you for pulling us out of that situation and help us get these songs recorded. Because you're right. We had done a lot of work for 3 or 4 years with Dave before he passed, and we had this body of work that was just sitting around on cassettes. And thanks to you, we were able to make Symbol of Salvation. So it turned out to be a great record.
I mean, I just loved all those songs so much, and it was like, you can't not record these songs. And it kind of, in a weird way, for almost everything surrounding the record, we'll get to some of that, but it kind of came together really well. Like, you guys got back together, and you're playing at a high level. We were very lucky enough to get Dave Jordan, who I loved because I worked with him with Alice in Chains to produce the record, and we kind of formed this whole thing. And I think a lot of people were happy you came back. And from my perspective, a couple questions to ask you. I remember this being a pretty easy record to make. I don't remember there being a lot of difficulties. It seemed like whenever I was in the studio, everything was going pretty well. I'm sure there were times when it wasn't, but it seemed from my end, and I was so invested in it, that it went pretty well, and it wasn't a difficult record.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. The process of it was really easy. Of course, working with Dave was a big plus. He's a super mellow guy, as you know, or was, he sadly just passed away recently, but he was a super mellow guy, laid back. He set up a nice environment in the studio. We worked with his engineer, Brian Karlstrom. Brian was also amazing to work with. And so they just made it a really great environment to work. So for us, it made our jobs so much easier. I think probably the most difficult part of it for us was probably just the emotional part of, this was only a year after Dave passed away. So we were still sort of in mourning and getting used to working without him. There was definitely a void the whole time. But, we just tried to think that he was always there with us. And, we tried to make the best of it. And I think that the vibe really came through in that record. It was a very emotional record for us to make. probably was the hardest thing, was that part of it. But you're right. The other part of it was great. It was a lot of fun. I remember having just actually fun hanging out in the studio. I never wanted to go home. It was cool.
Those are good records to make.
Yeah.
I think that we all felt that, there was definitely a presence of Dave in the studio. I think you guys had described a few things here and there where it's like, yeah, he's in here somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he was with us the whole time. He still is, really. A lot of times we always pay homage to him when we play live, and he's just a big part of the history of the band. And he was a big, huge pillar in setting up what our sound would become later in our careers. So without him, it just wouldn't be any Armored Saint. It would just be totally, completely different. So yeah, we always tried to keep him there with us, and he certainly was there for making a symbol. And in fact, I have mentioned this in interviews before, but we had these cassette 4-tracks that we had made during our writing period while he was still alive. And one of the songs that ended up on the record is called Tainted Past. And just to keep Dave in the spirit actually on the record, we lifted his solo from Tainted Past and we flew it into the newly recorded version of that ends up on Symbol. So that was that was another emotional night. Just making that happen was just insane. It was cool.
And in when you're making the record in 90 or 91, I can't remember when we're actually recording. 91. Flying in a solo from a cassette tape was not an easy thing to do back then.
No, this is before Pro Tools, before all that computer stuff. We literally cassette player, push play onto a 2-inch, then you had to fly it in. It was a different tempo, different tuning. It took some work, but Brian Karlstrom was pretty instrumental in making it actually happen. We had a grease pencil. People from the old school know what the grease pencil is, and yeah, we made it happen. And we high fives all around when we got it to happen at the end of the night. It was really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we've worked with Brian a lot. He's really, really great.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, too, at some point in the recording process, Dave felt comfortable enough with you to go, hey, why don't you take over recording some of these tracks and stuff? I don't have to be here the whole time.
That's true. It was during the recording of the lead vocals, sort of near the end of the recording session, and he was working with John, and he loved everything John did. John Bush is great. He opens his mouth and it just sounds good. And so that's what was happening with Dave. He's like, oh, it sounds great, sounds great. But John, at the end of a couple of sessions, kind of pulled me aside and was like, you know what? He's not pushing me enough. I think that I could do a little bit better, but he's not really pushing me. He's just letting me do whatever. So I said, well, all right. Well, so then I went to Dave and I talked to him and I said, hey, do you mind if I sat in and help push him a little further? And he basically said, well, look, why don't you just work with him and I'll just step out? I was blown away when he said that, because he's Dave Jordan. He's the producer, and we were he was the one steering the ship. And so he basically gave me the steering wheel at that point, and one thing turned into another. And not only was I working with John, but then I ended up working with Phil Sandoval and Jeff Duncan with their lead guitar parts. And it was the same thing. And Dave just said, he came in one day and said, you know what? You guys are doing great without me. I'm going to just check in with you every 3 or 4 days. I was like, what? Just gave me the keys to the candy store and said, have at it. So really, really cool. And he taught me a great deal about trust. It took a lot of balls for him to do that. And I never forgot that. And I always praised him for having the balls to trust somebody in the band to do that. So that was really cool.
Yeah, I was really happy because I really wanted him to do this record. Because like I said, I knew him and from the Alice in Chains stuff, and I loved the way they sounded. And I always felt and knew that John Bush was a huge influence on Lane Staley. And if you listen to Lane, Lane covered an Armored Saint song in his high school band, which you can find on YouTube somewhere. But I always felt that, and Lane confirmed it to me too. And they both sound similar, I thought. And Dave did such a great job with that, with Lane, obviously, and Alice in Chains. And I talked to Mark Lewis about the production thing. And one thing he mentioned that was really interesting was that he loves the production on this in large part because John's vocals are like really front and center. And kind of loud, which they also were in Alice in Chains. And a lot of people don't really do that. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Dave really knew how to bring it all together at the end. Not only did he set a nice mood and vibe in the studio, and then he sort of let me take charge at some point during the end, but he's the one who really put it in a bow and did the mix at the end and really, really made it happen, really made it all come to life. I think that he knew what the strong point of our songs were, and it's in the vocals, it's in John's voice and the melodies, and just he knew that he needed to make that something that was really, really a great focal point, in addition to the crunchy guitars and the big drums and everything. But he's got a great ability to do that. You listen to the Alice in Chains records and the production's just phenomenal, as you said. And part of that is because the vocals are so clear, but the guitars are just also so aggressive. Nothing gets in the way of each other. It's, just a testament to his capabilities and his talent.
Incredibly talented guy. I mean, I love obviously both Alice in Chains and Jane's Addiction, and so many other things he did too. So you wanted to talk specifically about the song "Last Train Home" because this is 100 songs that define heavy metal.
I brought up "Rain of Fire."
Oh, I'm sorry, "Rain of Fire." You're right.
"Rain of Fire" was the first single off the record. Big popular song at the time. It got a lot of that video that we made for "Rain of Fire" got a lot of airplay on MTV, Headbangers Ball. It was like it was on their playlist for the first 14 weeks, which was pretty unheard of, I thought, at the time. And it got a great response, and it helped kind of catapult the band back into the eye of the public and everything. Yeah, I mean, I could certainly talk about Symbol of Salvation too, the title track, because it's a bit of a different song and than Rain of Fire is.
And that's why I wanted to talk about it a little bit, just because I mean, this whole record is really important, but that song specifically, because the rest of the record is awesome, but I thought Symbol was just so heavy for what you guys were doing that I was like, wow, that's like a really interesting song. And it's got that great riff, and it's a really great, super heavy song.
The riff originally, the idea came up from Jeff Duncan, and Jeff is a huge Tony Iommi fan, as we all are. When I first heard that, I just thought it had Sabbath all over it, because it's got this sort of flat fifth kind of riff, and it's very dark sounding, and so I thought it was a killer riff. And then Gonzo and I added this sort of really heavy mid-tempo groove to it. And it just sort of set the stage for, like you said, a super heavy song, kind of a little bit outside of our box, I might say, for that period, but still sounding like us, but just very, very dark. And I think that's what drew us all to the riff and wanted to turn it into the song that we did. Yeah, it was a fun song to write. We had written it when it was with Dave Pritchard, obviously he was still alive and was with us, and we were in this 3-year writing period in between labels after getting dropped from Chrysalis in '88. That was one of the songs that we wrote when Jeff kind of came in and out of the band periodically during that period, and it was one of those times when he was in the band that we wrote Symbol. We just had fun working it out, and we just said, you know what, this is just so heavy, like let's just keep going with it and make it heavy. So we didn't want to write like a poppy or melodic chorus or anything, and so we just made it all heavy and dark.
The time it came out, in the early 90s, was metal was going away or being thrown away by the whole grunge scene, which is ironic that, we had Dave Jordan producing it, but throwing it all away. And for you guys to put out this amazing record with this one super heavy song, I felt was really just important as a nod to like the real super heavy metal stuff, because we could all feel it kind of crumbling around us a little bit, which is really sad.
Yeah, that's true. And also, don't forget, I know you don't forget, but some people don't forget that at that period of time, between 88 and 92, by that point, heavy metal had kind of become a bad word. And nothing against the hair metal scene necessarily, But a lot of the hair metal scene.
Oh no! It ruined everything. It completely ruined everything. And the major labels coming in and signing bands that didn't deserve to be signed because they had to sign it was a big mess.
Yeah, that was another period of time when we were sort of like trying to go against that. And Symbol of Salvation, a song like that, and even Rain of Fire are just like against all that. We were like, we want no part of this, and we're just, we're doing our thing. We're a heavy metal band.
Yeah, and that's the brilliance though of Rain of Fire is like it's a really heavy song. The riff's super heavy, but you've got these soaring choruses with this, and Rain of Fire, obviously, the imagery and everything coming from that. And I know the video, which I love, came out really great, has all that. And that was kind of the magic, is you could still write a super heavy song, but have it be big choruses and all the stuff that you want to hear from something that's more rock.
Again, sometimes a lot of these things creep through our influences. We all grew up in the 70s, so we're children of the hard rock scene of the 70s, as you are. We always bring that to the table. And so when you have a situation like a song like Rain of Fire, even though lyrically and image-wise it could be super dark and evil, which it is, but when you have this opportunity and you have John Bush in the band, you want to take advantage of have big open chorus and actually take advantage of the situation. So that's a good example of us doing that in Rain of Fire. It's actually a really simple song. There's not a whole lot going on in it, but again, it's just a great platform to shine the vocal talent from John Bush.
I always curious about this because a lot of really great songs don't take a long time to write. Was this song conceived pretty quickly, or did it flesh out over time?
Rain of Fire, if I remember correctly, came about pretty quickly. This song was predominantly written by Pritchard, and so he had all the parts, as far as I recall, pretty much down before coming into the rehearsal room. It was really, for us, it was just a matter of arranging it. I say the only time really spent on it, it's really just verse, B section, chorus, and then there's a solo section, but probably the time we spent most on it was creating the bridge part going into the solo section. Other than that, the song, it's one of those songs that sort of writes itself. It's one thing that me personally have learned over the years. I don't know if I necessarily knew this at the time, but there are a lot of songs that just write themselves, and the best thing to do is just to sit back and let it happen without overthinking it. That was one of the songs I think that came about pretty quickly.
It never ceases to amaze me. That's always the way it is. Like really great songs just seem to come by really quickly. And you've kept that in your set, through all these years. What's it like to play a lot of this stuff now, all these years later, and get such a great reaction?
For the songs on Symbol of Salvation in particular, this record was such a pivotal point for us, not only as a band, but as I mentioned earlier, just emotionally and learning, growing as people and, friends and artists and family members and so forth. And it was such an important stepping stone for us. That record in particular has a really soft spot in our hearts. So we still love playing songs from that record. I can't say the same about some of the older records. We won't mention any songs or names, but I still enjoy playing Rain of Fire as much as we play it every single time we play it. And I still get a kick out of playing it. It's a great song. It's a well-written song, and people love it. It's great to see people singing along. And so that much makes it even easier and funner. For the record, we still play Symbol quite often as well, Symbol of Salvation, as well as Last Train Home, we mentioned a little earlier. We played that a lot as well. Yep. We have a lot of fun playing those songs still. The cool thing we did a few years ago, and people might remember, we went out and played that record. And
the whole record, yep.
Yeah, and that was it was really sort of scary going into it. Like, oh my God, can we actually pull this off? And what are people going to care? Like, who cares? Is anybody really going to care? But it turns out that all the fans that came were so into it, and they were singing all the deep cuts, like Burning Question. I'm like, how is that even possible? But they were singing all the lyrics to the deep cuts, and it just really solidified the importance of that record.
I always say, I talk all the time because this record, obviously, we were all pretty disappointed that it didn't become this massive record that it should have been. And I firmly believe that if this record came out in 1989, it would have been massively huge, but we were coming out when it was almost impossible to sell a metal record. Like you said, it was a bad word for the most part anywhere. But now, when I look back on it, it's this iconic record. It's in the Hall of Fame of a bunch of these, magazines that do Hall of Fame things. It's constantly in a lot of people's top 20s, top 10s of all time. And yeah, when you did that tour, I remember, and you're playing good sized venues, and they were all, pretty much sold out. And the fans were so into the whole thing. It's like it go back to my analogy of it's a marathon and not a sprint. And the fact that this record is still so loved all these years later, it's almost better that it, didn't become a big record. That was like, I'm sick of that record. And now it's had this life of its own. And it's kind of a little bit of vindication that, like, yeah, this record is a legendary heavy metal album.
It does feel like that sometimes, and a lot of our career feels like that in a way. In a way, we had this renaissance in the 2000s, which I have no idea how that happened, but we kind of did. Like, we sort of were almost as popular, if not more popular than we ever were, which is, how is that even possible? This band is 45 years old. That makes no sense to me.
Well, but you have a great body of work, and you've been doing it at a high level for many, many years. And I've noticed even like with Metal Blade, I think the fact that you do this for so long and, at a pretty reasonable level, people tend to respect that and kind of appreciate that a lot more. I think especially now you see Metallica's bigger than they ever were. Iron Maiden's bigger than they ever were. It's kind of a thing now where really great bands that play at a high level and consistently continue to release really good music, that's not an easy thing to do.
No, it isn't. And kind of kudos goes to a lot of things, without patting myself on the back too hard, but kudos to the band for sticking together and making quality music, or at least attempting to make quality music all these years. Kudos to our record label, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but kudos to a record label that allows us to work in a sort of a pace that is comfortable for us and still supports us. We're a legacy act for sure. I know there's a lot of other priorities when it comes to business, but this label, Metal Blade, allows us to work in this manner and supports us, and always has. So that is something super, super lucky for. And then kudos to heavy metal fans all over the world who not just appreciate Armored Saint, but that are diehard Maiden fans, diehard Metallica fans. The list goes on, because without the fans, none of us can do any of this. I don't know. It's a perfect storm. The bottom line is that we're super lucky to be in this position, and we're really thankful. And yeah, we're stoked.
And to use another cliche, you have to be good to be lucky too. So there is
that. We try. We're trying to be good.
Yeah, I do love the fact that you went out and did that tour with the whole record, because I just think that speaks volumes about how important this record is over the course of time. And it was so well received all over the world, really.
Yeah, it was. I remember when the record first came out, we got great reviews all over the world. You mentioned a little bit earlier, I think that we all, yourself and the label and the band, had high hopes because the response was so good out the gate. We thought, this is, something really big's going to happen. But then we were fighting an uphill battle in the genre because of the landscape. The music landscape at the time had changed so drastically. But you mentioned again, like, there is some vindication later, 30 years later or whatever, that people seem to think, fans and people in publications or whatnot seem to think that this record had an impact at some point during the 90s and that it's lasted.
It absolutely did.
Yeah. So it's a cool thing. We're really, really grateful for that.
Yeah. And it's always funny to me that, metal was such a bad word. I get it. And it had to go reinvent itself, which is fine. Yeah. And we're all good now. Yeah. But, all those bands, especially like Alice in Chains, they were all metalheads. Like I mentioned, Lane Staley was a huge John Bush fan and grew up kind of idolizing him, but he could never say that in Alice in Chains because that's not cool at this point, which is kind of crazy looking back at it. But yeah, I talked to so many younger kids, younger than I am, who, love that record and really go back to like, I heard that record when I was like, 12 or 13, or I saw Rain of Fire video on MTV. It's like, I got so into that band. It was such a great thing. And they've all, now turned out to be either musicians or engineers or, something in the industry. And it's always nice to hear people that were influenced by stuff like that. Cause you just put out records to put out good art and good music. And you don't really think about who's listening to them, but many people are listening to them and getting really influenced by it, which is, I love to hear those stories.
Yeah, me too. It's funny because all walks of life, I hear it from all walks of life, and it's at different age groups. And it's really sort of just mind blowing sometimes. It ranges from like, I met a guy in Slipknot one time and he told me Chemical Euphoria was like his summer of 85. That was his summer of 85 song. And I'm like, what? And then I'm going through customs at LAX. And then the guy at customs is looking at my passport and he goes, Joseph Vera, do you go by Joey? Are you Joey Vera? I'm like, yeah, like, what did I do? I'm innocent. And he's like, dude, I'm a huge fan. I'm like, what the hell? This is crazy. So it's all over the place. And especially in the early days, you don't really see how close you're touching people way before the internet. And it's a little bit more accessible now. But back then, there was no access to who you were reaching. So it's a little bit of a vacuum, I guess. But years later, it's good to know, like, oh, people were listening and it mattered to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million stories, but of course, one of my favorite stories is with Mike Piazza when he used to play for the Dodgers. Yeah. And John Bush had actually John Bush had like ran into one of his old friends or something, and he's like, oh, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, but I'm also a bat boy for the Dodgers. And John just kind of jokingly said, well, tell Mike Piazza I said hi. And he sees the guy a couple weeks later and he runs over and goes, dude, I told Piazza that I know you. And he freaked out. He's a huge Armored Saint fan. He gave me his number to give to you to go hang out with him. So John went to hang out with him a few times and then called me up and said, dude, Piazza wants to meet you. I'm like, what? Like, yeah, he's a huge metal fan. I'm like, really? So we went out to meet him and Eric Karros was with him and ended up hanging out with those guys a lot. And Piazza's a massive Armored Saint fan, like always has been. So you just never know. You never know. He's come to a few shows and we're like in awe of him, but he's in awe of us. It's so funny, like, no, you're awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you're awesome. He's a really great guy. I had a lot of fun hanging out with him in cool. LA before the idiot Dodgers got traded to New York, Miami and then New York, but that's a whole other story. Yeah. Well, dude, thank you so much for doing this. I greatly appreciate it. It's a lot of fun. And again, it's always fun to talk about these legendary records that still to this day stand the test of time. And it makes everything work. Thanks for having me. It's an honor being here. It's a really cool podcast. I've listened to a whole bunch of episodes and it's really cool. I like the different perspectives from different people in the industry. And it's really cool to hear. Thank you for keeping it alive and look forward to it coming out. And thanks for all the kind words. It's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun. Hey, that's the name of the game. It's life. As long as it's fun, it's not work. Exactly. Well, thanks again, my friend. Be good. All right. You too, Brian. Thank you. And this episode comes to an end now. I have to thank my good friend Joey Vera for doing this, Mr. Mark Lewis, producer extraordinaire, Martin Popoff for all of his great information, Lizzie Borden for our theme song, and of course, the man putting it all together behind the scenes here, Christian Blatt. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys next episode.